If you want to take your Excel to the next level, it's absolutely crucial that you learn some text manipulation formulas. They'll allow you to clean your data and get it ready for analysis. Today, I'm going to show you 8, including left, mid, right, substitute and search, plus a few others. And we're going to take this data over here and pull out some key things like first name and surname from that email address column. The first one I'll show you is called left, and it's arguably the most simple one. To use it, type equals left, point at the cell where you want to take some text from, so this one here, and we're going to try and pull out John from john.doe@gmail.com. Now John is the first 4 characters of this, so if we hit a comma and then the number 4, close the brackets and hit enter, we get John. Now as that scrolls down, the problem that we get is that Jane's fine, Mike's fine, Anna's fine, Mark's fine, but Sarah actually is Sarah with an H. Robert obviously now shows as Robe, which is totally incorrect. So fine for some things, but not for others. Where this would be useful though is the email address. So in this example here, they're all at gmail.com. So we could just take a gamble here and subtract the email from that wider string. So Gmail 5.1 and then 3 for com. So that equals 9 in total. So we would use equals right for this one. So we're taking from the right, and then we want to say how many characters we want to use. So open brackets. So we want to point at this here, comma, and then we're going to hit a 9, close the brackets, hit enter, and we get gmail.com in all of those cells. So let's fix this first name column. We know that the left function's good, but it only works in this case where we've got 4 characters as the first name. Now, what we can see is that every email address is formatted in the format first name dot surname. So if we can identify where the dot is, we'll know how many characters to the left of that we'll need to take to get the full first name. I've added this helper column here, which is going to assist us in finding that dot. And we're going to use a function called search. So equals search, open brackets. The find text wants to be what you're looking for. In our case, it's going to be a dot. So speech marks dot speech marks, comma. And we want to tell it where we're going to look for that in. So it's going to be in the email address. So just point at that, close your brackets, hit enter, and it will tell us where the dot is. Now with John, we wanted the 4 characters to the left of the dot. The dot is at column at point 5 in that, character 5. So if we just subtract 1 from that, hit enter, then we've got 4, 4, 4, 4, which is the length of the first name. And then when we get to Sarah, we've got 5, exactly as we want. So what we can then do is change first name, keep the left function, but instead of having a static value in here of 4, we can just point it at this helper column here, hit enter, and then we get all of the first names subtracted from that email address perfectly. So to tidy this up and remove the need for the helper column, we can just take the formula that's in there, so drag over it, hit Control C or right click and copy on your keyboard, and then hit escape. Now we can go into the first name, and instead of pointing at F5 where the formula is, we can just put the formula straight in here. So drag over it and then Control V on your keyboard, and that will put the formula from the helper column into the first name column, hit enter, and then it works without the helper column. Now the mid formula takes a position in a string of text and then gives you a number of characters to the right which you define. So let me just show you a really simple example. So if I do equals mid, and we're going to click on email address again, comma, and now it wants the position in the text that you want to start from. So let's just put a random number in there, 7, click a comma, and then we want to take 3 characters after that position. So 3, close brackets. So 7 is the starting character, and we want 3 from that point on. Hit enter, and there we go, we've got OE @ sign. What does that mean? Well, it means that O is the 7th character in this email string, and then we've got OE @ sign, which is 3 characters from that point. And obviously that's different for each of them because they're different lengths of email addresses based on the first name and the surname. So let's tweak up our helper column, and this time instead of 1 position to the left of the dot, we want 1 position to the right of the dot. So we know that the dot in email address is in position 5, and we want to add 1 to that in all cases. Hit enter. Now that gives us 1 to the right of the dot, which we also know to be the start of the surname. So if we now go back to our mid formula over here, and instead of starting at 7, which is just a random point for example, we point it at our helper column here and hit enter. Now we've got the surname and then @gmail.com, so whatever the email address happens to be. So that's pulled out all the surnames, but we've got to somehow get rid of that @gmail.com bit, which will just leave us with the surname. Again, I'm going to copy our formula straight out of our helper column. So take this part here without the equals, Control C to copy, hit escape, and then we want to go into surname here, and we're going to replace F5 Control V with that formula. Hit enter, and then we've got it in there, and we can get rid of the helper column again. We're not going to get rid of it though. We're going to blank it because I'm just going to use it to show you another function. The substitute function is brilliant because it allows you to replace a piece of text or a single character from a cell and replace it with something else of your choosing. So in this case, we're going to try and replace @gmail.com in all of the email addresses with a blank. So basically it will remove it. Let me show you how that works. So we type equals substitute, open brackets, text is the cell that you want to look at. So in this case, our email address cell here, comma, and it asks for old text. So the old text is @gmail.com. We want a speech mark to close that off, then a comma. We want to replace it with nothing. So speech marks, nothing, speech marks, close our brackets, hit enter, and look, we've got John.Doe, Jane.Smith. So we've got the first name dot surname. So as I always say in Excel, there's no right or wrong way, there's just better ways. So the key is having lots of tools in your armory or knowing what to search for on Google to find a way of achieving what you have in your head that you want to get to. So in this example here, I think we've got to a point where there's 3 possible and obvious solutions. So to get the surname, we could search for this dot that we've got in our helper column here, and then take all of the characters to the right of that using our mid function. So if we search for dot in here, we'll get the position of the dot. If we want the character to the right of that, we could just add one on, so +1, and then we could do equals mid, open brackets, point at this helper column here, comma. We want to start at what the position of the dot is, +1, as we've already got to, and then over to the right here, we want the number of characters. So comma, number of characters. We've shown that we can go all the way to the right and it will just stop at whatever point the string ends. The string is now shortened because we've taken off the @gmail.com, so we can just put 100 in there, close brackets, and then we get the surname in there. So that's solution 1. Solution 2 would be to substitute this surname column and get rid of the @gmail.com. So we could do equals substitute, open brackets, and the text would be where we've got our surname column so far. That's the point we got up to. And we want to substitute @gmail.com, and we want to replace it with nothing. So double speech marks, close your brackets, hit enter, and we've got the surname in that way as well. Solution 3, we could just identify the @ sign in this surname column here, and then we could take everything to the left of that. So equals search, open brackets, and we want to search for find text is @ sign. So speech marks, @ sign, speech marks, a comma. We want to find it in here. That will give us the position of the @ sign. And we want everything to the left of the @ sign. So if we take one off this, so -1, that will give us the number of characters we want to the left of the @ sign. So that gives us the part of the left formula. So in front of it, we want to type left, open brackets, we want to point at the surname, comma, and then it wants the number of characters, and we've obtained that using our search function. So all we need to do is put a bracket on the right, and again, that's another way of getting the surname. No right or wrong way, just whichever works best for you. So the use of these tools is largely dependent on just being able to spot patterns within strings of text that are common across the whole column. So in this case, we can see that the street is actually separated by a comma from the city and then obviously the country, but it does have a number in front of it. So the first thing we want to do is get everything to the left of that comma. So we're going to type equals search, open brackets, and we're going to look for a comma in here. So if we click on this address here, close the brackets, and it will tell us the position of the comma. So 16 is the first comma in here, and then 15 is the first comma in here. Now we want to take one off that, and that will give us the number of characters to the left of the column that we want. And then all we need to do is type left in front of that, open brackets, click on address again, hit a comma, and then the number of characters that we want to the left of that whole cell is defined by our search function. So to close that off, hit a bracket on the end, hit enter, and we've got 123 Main Street there. Now we've got 123 Main Street, but we just want Main Street. So we know that 123 and then a space. The space is the position 4, and we want to start to the right of that, which would be position 5. So I've added in a helper column here, which looks for the space and then tells us one additional character to the right of that. So position 5 would be where the M is in this thing here. So if we type equals mid, open brackets, text wants to be this here where we've got street, and then comma, and we're going to use that search function to give us position 5. That is the starting point of the mid function. When we hit our comma after this, it will ask us how many characters we want. And again, we're just going to put 100 to get all the way to the end of that string. Close the brackets, hit enter, and we've then got the street name in there. Now, sometimes when you look at formulas, they can look hugely confusing, but the easiest way to understand them is to build them up bit by bit. So in this example here, we've got a relatively short formula where we've gone looking for the middle point based on a search for a dot, or in this case, sorry, an @ sign, and then we've took everything to the right of that. But in here, we've got H5 and H5 again. In H5, we did a left formula combined with a search. Now we can bring all of those together into a single formula just by taking this formula out of here. So Control C, escape, and then dropping it into this helper column over the top of H5. Control V, and then over this H5 as well, Control V. Now that formula, if you tried to write it off the bat, would be almost impossible to do. But having broken it down into these parts, we've now got a formula that is completely dynamic, doesn't rely on any helper columns. So we can delete this one here and just rename this to street. Now we've got a single formula. Yes, it's complex, but it's been built up from the ground up, so we'll understand how we've got there. It refers to only one column here, this address column, and it's all in one neat column, meaning we don't need any helper columns or anything else. Now getting town is going to be a bit more tricky because we want to look for it to the right of the first comma, but also to the left of the second comma. So it's between those two, and also it's got a space before every single town, so we need to remove that somehow. Now you may have noticed when we did search earlier, so equals search, open brackets, it asked us for find text, so we might want to put in a comma there. Within text, that's the cell that we're going to point at, so address, and then there's another bit on the end which says start number. So if I put that as 1, close brackets, then we get 16, which is the position of the first comma. So now we know that the comma in the first instance starts at 16. If we change this 1 to a 17, which will be one position to the right of the comma, and hit enter, what it's now going to do is pick up the second comma. So in this example here, any town, the second comma is at position 25. Now that also works here for the second one, but it hasn't worked here for this one. And that is because it's a longer address. So the position of the first comma is later on. So therefore 17 doesn't exclude the first comma. So to make that dynamic, we need to build that search into another search. Let me show you how to do that. So we're going to start off with a basic search. So we're going to search for the comma, and that will always give us our first one. So find text is comma, and we're looking for that in this address here. We don't want to put a start number because actually it will default to starting at position 1. Close our brackets, and then we get the position of the first comma. Now, if we just add 1 to that, we know we're one position to the right of that first comma. 17, 16, and then we can see down here we've got this 18 for Cedar Street, which didn't work a minute ago. So I've just renamed that column as helper and moved town 1 to the right. So if we use our equals search again, open brackets, find text, we're looking for a comma, but we know we want to find the second one. Hit a comma again, within text in the address cell here, another comma, and then start number. This time we're going to point at our helper column, which we know to be one position to the right of the comma. That means it's going to exclude everything up to that point and start searching to the right, starting from, in this case, 17. So we close our brackets, we hit enter, and there we go. We've got the position of the second comma in all cases. So a quick refresher, and I've relabeled the columns just to help us out. So start, we've obtained that by searching for the comma and the first comma, and then taking one position to the right of that. So in this case here, address, the comma is at position 16, and we've added 1 to get 17, which is the position of the start of the string that tells us what town is. We then want the end of that string, which is basically the next comma. We obviously want to take 1 off that to get back to the letter before it. But for now, that tells us that the position of the comma is 25. So that's the second comma. So the first comma is 16 plus 1, the start of town, and that goes all the way to the next comma, 25. Now in this helper column here, if I do 25, so equals this one here, subtract off the 17, hit enter, and it tells us the length of town that's in the middle. So here we've got space and then any town, which is 7 characters long, totaling 8, and then obviously 13 for the next one. Now we could use that in a mid function to tell us how many characters we want from the start point. So if I now do equals mid, open brackets, hit on address, as our cell for reference, comma, the start number is then 17, and the number of characters is now this helper column here, 8, close our brackets, hit enter, and you can see there that we've got all of the towns showing in there. So as not to complicate it too much, I'm not going to combine that one up into a single formula. So I'm just going to hide these helper columns for a minute and leave them there as part of how we get town. Now that will allow me to show you two new formulas which will be really useful to you. When we subtracted any town from this address here, we were aware that there was a space in front. And in fact, there's a space in front of all of the towns that are in here. Now it's in this format, it's not obvious. So if we type in here equals len, open brackets, and then click on town, close the brackets, hit enter, we can see that we get 8. Any town is 7 characters long. So we've got that extra space in there, and it's showing up when we do a length formula. So what we could do is just work out how many characters to the right using like mid and left and all the other things we've just done, or search for the space and remove it, or replace the space with nothing. That would do it. But we've got to know that the space is there. And what if there's a space at the other end or multiple spaces in front of it? There's a function called trim, which will reduce that down and remove any spaces afterwards or before, so it just cleans up your text in a whole column. So if we type equals trim, open brackets, and then click on there, hit enter. Now visibly those two things are no different, but let's add in a couple of helper columns in here. So column 1, we're going to do equals len of this one again, and as we know it's 8, but if we do equals len of this one, close brackets, it's 7. It's stripped that space off the start of each of the ones in this column, and that's really useful, and it would do that if there was multiple spaces after it as well. So let's just prove that. So if I hit a load of spaces in here, and we can see the difference there. So we've got 12 and we've stripped it down to 7. So it's taken off the space before and any spaces afterwards. And obviously to clean it up, it would be better to just include trim before our formula here. So open brackets and then close on the end after the formula that we've already created. Hit enter, and then we can get rid of any of these. And then we've got town perfectly with the right number of characters subtracted from this address dynamically. Before we go on to getting phone number in just number format, I've added in country, and I've used some of the techniques we've already used today to get to that. If you want to know how to do it, you can look in the formula bar at the top when I click on this cell here, or you can drop me a comment below if you want a further description on how we get to that. So there's loads of ways we can do this, and I'm going to use a combination of formulas we've done, but also a bit of concatenate to get just the numbers out of this without the dashes, the space, and the open and close brackets. So I can see here, looking at it, that we've got a bracket to start, and then we've got a bracket in position 5 as well. So text, I want this, and our start number, I'm going to start in position 2, which should be the first 5, and then I just want 3 characters, and that should give me the 555. So we now want all of the rest of the numbers that aren't the 555. So if we were to look for the space using our tools, so search for speech marks, space, speech marks, comma, find it within this phone number here, close our brackets, hit enter. That's the position of the space. If we add 1 to that, we get the position of the start of the numbers to the right. So if I do now mid in here, so equals mid, open brackets, click in phone number, comma, our start point is this 7 in this case here, another comma, and we want all of the characters to the right. So 100, close that, and then we've got, let's just expand that a bit. So that's all of the rest of it there. Now we want to get rid of that dash that's in the middle of these numbers here. So if you use substitute, now if you start typing and it suggests the one you want, if you just hit tab, it will put it in for you. Stops you trying to spell it, as I was going to cock it up anyway. So we then want to point at the text that we want, which is this column here. The old text is a dash. So close that in speech marks, hit a comma, and the new text that we want is nothing. So we basically just have speech marks with nothing in between. Close that off, hit enter. Now we've got the number together. So this is what we want. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on the right of 555. Now let's use concatenate to get to that. Concatenate this 555, comma, with this column here, close the brackets, hit enter, and there you go. You've got the full number in there. Now, a final formula to show you is text. So if you type is text and then point it at a series of a string of characters, close it off, and it will tell you it's true. Now that means that it's not stored as a number. So to translate something that appears to be numbers but is stored as text, and we've checked that here using this formula is text, you just put value in front of it. So if I type value in front of that, and close the brackets after it, hit enter, you'll see that they've all changed to false. So that value is now stored as a value. It's numbers, which means we could then, if it wasn't a phone number, start adding things to it, subtracting and manipulating that data. And then just to finish it off, you'll see that I've combined it into a single formula at the top, just to show you that you don't need the helper columns and you can do it all off this one column here.